What if I told you that one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century began with a man who had no name, no past, and a secret code that remains unbroken to this very day? Welcome back to Untold Case, where we dive deep into the mysteries that refuse to stay buried. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a case. And if you love unsolved mysteries as much as we do, smash that like button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end of this one, because what happened on a beach in Australia in 1948 will leave you questioning everything you think you know about cold cases. On a scorching summer morning in Australia, December 1st, 1948, a couple strolled along Somerton Beach in Adelaide, enjoying the warm breeze off the ocean. The sun was already climbing high in the cloudless sky, promising another blistering day in the Australian summer. As they walked past a low seawall, the woman noticed what appeared to be a man lying against it, one arm stretched upward, as if reaching for something in his final moment. His legs were crossed at the ankles, extended straight out before him. He looked almost peaceful, she thought, like someone who had simply dozed off while watching the sunset the night before. But something felt wrong. The man didn't move. He wore a full suit on a beach in the middle of summer. His tie was perfectly knotted, his shoes polished to a shine that caught the morning light. The couple exchanged glances. Uncertain what to make of the scene before them, they walked on, assuming he was drunk or sleeping off a rough night, just another soul recovering from the previous evening's festivities. After all, Adelaide had its share of characters, and a man sleeping on the beach, while unusual, wasn't entirely unheard of. Others passed him too throughout that morning. A man exercising on the beach around 6:30 in the morning had seen him there, arm raised in that same strange position, reaching toward nothing. The exerciser had assumed the same thing, that the man was drunk or ill, and had continued with his morning routine. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly on the figure against the seawall. Still, the well-dressed man didn't move. His arm remained frozen in that upward reach, as if time itself had stopped for him while the world continued turning around his motionless form. Finally, around 7 in the evening, after an entire day had passed with the man in the same position, someone decided to check on him, and discovered the truth that would launch one of the most perplexing investigations in criminal history. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't drunk. He was dead. When police arrived at the scene, they found themselves facing something far stranger than a simple death on a beach. The man appeared to be in his early to mid-40s, standing about 5 feet 11 inches tall, with gray-blue eyes and ginger-brown hair going gray at the sides. He was clean-shaven, with a strong jaw and defined features. His build was athletic, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, physically fit and well-groomed in a way that suggested he took pride in his appearance. His hands were soft and uncalloused, suggesting he didn't do manual labor. His fingernails were clean and neatly trimmed. Everything about him spoke of a man who took care of himself, who paid attention to details, who lived a life of some refinement. And yet, no one knew who he was. Police searched his pockets, hoping for a wallet, an identification card, a letter, a scrap of paper with a name, anything that might tell them who this well-dressed corpse had been in life. Instead, they found a collection of items that only deepened the mystery and raised more questions than they answered. There was a second-class unused rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, dated for the day his body was found. There was a bus ticket, an aluminum, American-made comb, unusual for Australia at the time, a pack of Army Club cigarettes. But when they opened it, inside the pack were 7 Kensitas cigarettes, a completely different brand. Why would someone put different cigarettes in the wrong pack? There were matches, a pack of juicy fruit chewing gum, and a small piece of metal, possibly from a stencil or some kind of tool. That was it. No wallet, no money, no identification of any kind, no keys, no personal effects that might connect him to anyone or anywhere. It was as if this man had deliberately stripped himself of anything that might reveal who he was. The police examined his clothing more carefully, looking for manufacturers' tags or laundry marks that might lead them to his identity. Tailors and laundries often marked clothing with identifying stamps or tags. Manufacturers put labels in jackets and trousers. Surely something would bear a name, or a shop, or a city that could point them in the right direction. But here the mystery deepened further still, taking on an almost sinister quality. Every single label had been meticulously removed from his clothing. His white shirt, no label. His brown suit jacket, no label. His trousers, no label. His coat, no label. Someone had gone through each piece of clothing and carefully cut or torn out every identifying mark. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't the work of someone who simply removed an itchy tag. This was deliberate, methodical, purposeful. Someone, whether the dead man himself or another person, had wanted to ensure that these clothes could not be traced. Well, almost every label. In their thorough search, investigators found 3 labels that had somehow escaped removal. On the coat, they found a name, T. Keene. On the vest, another name, Keene. And curiously, on the tie, inexplicably, the name Keene again. Finally, a lead. Police immediately began searching for anyone named T. Keene, or just Keene, who might be connected to this case. But this lead, like so many others in this case, led nowhere. No missing persons reports matched their dead man. No one named Keene came forward to identify him. No T. Keene had been reported missing. It was as if the name was a false trail, or perhaps the clothes had belonged to someone else entirely, maybe purchased second-hand, maybe stolen, maybe borrowed, or maybe T. Keene was exactly who he was, but no one who knew him realized he was missing. The autopsy, conducted by pathologist John Barclay Bennett, revealed findings that were simultaneously enlightening and deeply puzzling. The man's last meal had been a pasty, eaten approximately 3 to 4 hours before death. His stomach contents showed signs of blood. His spleen was significantly enlarged, about 3 times its normal size. His liver showed signs of congestion. His brain was also congested. There was blood mixed with fluid in his stomach. His pupils were smaller than normal and unusually contracted. His heart showed signs of what the pathologist described as acute heart failure. But what had caused this heart failure? That was the question that would haunt investigators for decades. Dr. Bennett noted that the organs showed signs consistent with poisoning, possibly with a digitalis-based compound or some other cardiac toxin. The small pupils suggested an opiate or similar substance. But here was the problem. Despite extensive testing with every method available to 1948 forensic science, no poison could be definitively identified in his system. Whatever had killed him, if it was indeed poison, it was either something they couldn't test for with their current methods, or it had metabolized and left his system, leaving only the damage behind. The pathologist concluded that death was likely due to heart failure, but he couldn't rule out poisoning. The small pupils, the enlarged spleen, the congestion, the blood in the stomach, all pointed to some kind of toxic substance. But without being able to identify what that substance was, they were left with more questions than answers. Police took the dead man's fingerprints and sent them to every state in Australia. They sent them to every English-speaking country. They sent them across the world. Surely someone, somewhere, would have a record of this man. Surely he had applied for a job, been arrested, served in the military, done something that would have required his fingerprints to be taken and recorded. Nothing. No matches. Anywhere in the world. They made a plaster cast of his face, capturing every detail of his features. They made casts of his hands. They displayed these at the police station, inviting the public to come and see if they recognized him. They published photographs in newspapers across Australia and internationally. Thousands of people came to look at the death mask. Tips poured in. People were certain they knew him. He was a missing brother, a former neighbor, a man who used to work at the factory, a customer at the shop. Every single tip led nowhere. Every identification proved false. It was as if this man had appeared on Somerton Beach fully formed, with no past, no connections, no life before that moment. But then, months after the body was found, came the discovery that would transform this case from a simple, unidentified death into one of the most intriguing mysteries of the 20th century. A reporter named Frank Kennedy was covering the inquest. He had been following the case closely, frustrated like everyone else by the complete lack of progress. One day, he decided to examine the dead man's clothing more carefully to see if perhaps the police had missed something. He carefully went through each pocket again. He ran his hands along every seam. He checked the lining, and then, in a tiny hidden pocket in the waistband of the man's trousers, a pocket so small and so well concealed that the initial search had missed it, he found something. A tiny scrap of paper, rolled up tightly. When he unrolled it carefully, he found 2 words printed on it in a distinctive typeface: Tamám Shud. The words meant nothing to most people, but to those familiar with Persian literature, they were immediately recognizable. Tamám Shud, sometimes written as Tamám Shud, meaning finished or ended in Persian, were the final words of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of poems by the 11th century Persian poet and mathematician. These 2 words appeared at the very end of the book, the final punctuation on a meditation about the transience of life and the inevitability of death. The lover's moon, the poet's night, how soon they pass away, yet are they not too brief, too soon, if only love decay. Then, heed the dying master's cry, that when your time has come, you may not cry that all too soon. O Lord, the play is done. Tamám Shud. It was finished. Ended. The play was done. But this scrap of paper wasn't just a philosophical statement. It had been torn from an actual book. The distinctive typeface and the rough, torn edge made that clear. Somewhere out there was a copy of the Rubaiyat, with the final page torn, missing these 2 words. And if they could find that book, perhaps they could find answers. Police issued a public appeal. Did anyone have a copy of the Rubaiyat with the final page torn? Had anyone found such a book? Perhaps discarded somewhere, perhaps left behind. The appeal went out across Adelaide, across Australia, and then, incredibly, someone came forward. A man whose identity was never publicly revealed and who has been referred to in reports simply as Ronald Francis, told police that several months earlier, around the time the body was discovered, he had found a copy of the Rubaiyat in his car. His car had been parked in Glenelg, near Somerton Beach, on the night of November 30th, the night before the body was found. The car had been unlocked. When he got in the car the next day, there was a book in the back seat that hadn't been there before. He had thought nothing of it at the time, assuming perhaps it had fallen out of someone's pocket or been left by a passenger he had forgotten about. The man still had the book. When he brought it to police, they examined it carefully. The final page was torn. The words, Tamám Shud, were missing. The scrap found in the dead man's pocket fit the tier perfectly. They had found the right book. But rather than providing answers, it opened up a mystery within a mystery that would prove even more perplexing than the unidentified body itself. On the back cover of the book, written in pencil, was a local phone number. Below that were 5 lines of seemingly random letters, carefully printed in capital letters. The letters appeared to be some kind of code or cipher. WRG, OAB, ABD, MLI, AOI, AWTG, ATA, BMTG, BML, IAOQZ. Police immediately called the phone number written on the back of the book. It belonged to a young woman who lived in Glenelg, not far from where the body was found. When police came to interview her, she turned pale when she saw the death mask. She looked as though she might faint. She claimed she didn't know the man, couldn't identify him, had never seen him before, but her reaction suggested otherwise. Something about that face had shaken her deeply. The woman's identity was kept secret during the initial investigation. She was only known in reports as Jestin, though this was later revealed to be a sort of nickname. She told police a strange story. During the war, she had been in Sydney and had befriended an officer. She had given him a copy of the Rubaiyat as a gift, but she insisted that the book police had shown her was not the same copy she had given away. The one she had given had an inscription in it. This one didn't. Was she telling the truth? Police weren't sure. Her reaction to seeing the death mask suggested she knew more than she was saying, but they couldn't prove anything. She stuck to her story. She didn't know the dead man. She couldn't help them. As for the code on the back of the book, police brought in military intelligence officers. They brought in cryptographers. They brought in mathematicians and linguists. Everyone who looked at it agreed it appeared to be some kind of cipher or code. But what kind? And what did it say? Some thought it might be an acrostic, where the first letter of each line spelled out a message. W, M, A, L. That spelled nothing. Others thought it might be a substitution cipher, where each letter represented another letter. But without knowing what system had been used, or what language the original message was in, breaking it was nearly impossible. Some thought it might be a book cipher, where the letters referred to specific words in a book, perhaps in the Rubaiyat itself, or another book entirely. But attempts to decode it using the Rubaiyat went nowhere. One cryptographer noted that the second and fourth lines appeared similar, both starting with A and ending with M. Was that significant? Did it mean those lines contained the same message with slight variations? Or was it coincidence? Another expert pointed out that if you crossed out certain letters as if they were mistakes, the remaining letters could potentially spell out names or words. But this seemed like speculation, seeing patterns where none might exist, the human mind's desperate attempt to find meaning in randomness. Decades later, amateur code breakers would use computers to attempt to crack the code, trying every known cipher method, every possible substitution, every conceivable pattern. Nothing worked. Either it was a code so sophisticated that it remained unbreakable even with modern technology, or it wasn't a code at all. Perhaps it was random letters, meaningless scribbles, or some kind of personal notation that only made sense to the person who wrote it. But there was another detail on the back of the book that added yet another layer to the mystery. Below the code were what appeared to be 2 phone numbers, partially erased, but still faintly visible. One was the number that led police to the woman in Glenelg. The other number has never been identified. Who did it belong to? Another person, connected to the dead man, or just a random notation, a number someone had jotted down and later tried to erase. As the investigation continued, police pursued every possible lead, no matter how tenuous. They interviewed everyone who had been in the Somerton Beach area that day. They checked missing persons reports, going back years. They contacted military organizations, thinking perhaps the man had been a soldier or spy. The timing seemed significant. This was 1948, just 3 years after the end of World War II. The Cold War was beginning. Adelaide was a strategic location, home to military installations and rocket testing ranges. Could this man have been involved in espionage? The theory gained some traction when investigators learned that the woman in Glenelg, Jestin, had connections to people involved in military intelligence. She had worked at a military hospital. During the war, she had associated with officers and military personnel. Could the dead man have been a contact of hers? A fellow operative? Someone who knew too much and had to be silenced? But there was no evidence to support this theory beyond speculation and coincidence. Yes, labels had been removed from his clothing, which suggested tradecraft. Yes, he carried a strange code. Yes, he had a connection, however tenuous, to someone with military ties. But that didn't prove he was a spy, and it certainly didn't explain how or why he died on that beach. Other theories emerged over the years. Some thought he might have been a jilted lover who had poisoned himself after being rejected. The Rubaiyat, after all, was often given as a romantic gift. Perhaps he had come to Adelaide to see this woman, the one in Glenelg, and when she refused to see him or rejected him, he had taken his own life on the beach near her home, leaving behind the book as a final message. The code could have been a love letter, a poem, a final declaration that only she would understand. But if that were true, Why remove all the labels from his clothing? Why go to such lengths to hide his identity? And why would the woman deny knowing him if he had simply been a rejected lover? There was more to this story, something darker and more complex than a simple tale of unrequited love. Another theory suggested he might have been a professional poisoner who had accidentally poisoned himself. Perhaps he carried poison for use in his work, whatever that work might have been, and had somehow ingested it accidentally. Perhaps the small, unused rail ticket suggested he had been planning to leave Adelaide, but had succumbed to the poison before he could board the train. Yet another theory proposed that he was involved in some kind of smuggling operation, perhaps bringing drugs or contraband into Australia, and had been poisoned by associates in a deal gone wrong. The different cigarettes in the wrong pack could have been a signal or a way of hiding something. The removed labels could have been standard practice for someone living outside the law, constantly moving, never wanting to be traced. But none of these theories could be proven. Every lead hit a wall. Every promising avenue ended in frustration. The Somerton Man, as he came to be known, remained stubbornly anonymous, his secrets buried with him. In 1949, after all investigative avenues had been exhausted, the body was embalmed and buried in West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide. The gravestone bore a simple inscription: "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." Even in death, he remained nameless, but the case refused to die. Over the decades, it captured the imagination of amateur sleuths, conspiracy theorists, cryptographers, and true crime enthusiasts around the world. Books were written about the Somerton Man. Documentaries were made. Websites were dedicated to solving the mystery. People spent years of their lives trying to decode the mysterious letters, to identify the body, to find some thread that would unravel the whole tangled mystery. In the 2000s, a researcher named Derek Abbott became fascinated with the case. He was a professor at the University of Adelaide, with expertise in biomedical engineering and a passion for solving impossible problems. He began to investigate the case systematically, using modern technology and techniques that hadn't been available to the original investigators. Abbott examined photographs of the death mask and the body with high-resolution imaging. He looked for unique physical characteristics that might help identify the man. He noticed that the man's ears had a distinctive shape, with a particular formation called a cimba, larger than the cavum, a rare trait found in only 1 to 2% of the population. He had a condition called hypodontia, where certain teeth never developed, another rare trait. He had high-set calves, suggesting perhaps he had been a ballet dancer or an athlete of some kind. Abbott also became interested in the woman from Glenelg, whose real name was revealed years later as Jessica Ellen Thompson, though she went by the name Jo. Abbott managed to track down her family and, through a series of unlikely events, eventually married one of her descendants. His investigation had become deeply personal. He pursued the theory that the Somerton Man might have been the biological father of Jo Thompson's son, Robin. Robin had been born in 1947, just over a year before the Somerton Man's death. Robin had died in 2009, but Abbott noted that Robin had several of the same rare physical traits as the Somerton Man: the unusual ear shape, the high-set calves, the spacing of the teeth. Could this be coincidence, or was it evidence of a biological connection? If the Somerton Man was Robin's father, it would explain Jo Thompson's reaction to seeing the death mask. It would explain why she denied knowing him. She was married to someone else and wouldn't want to admit to an affair. It would explain why the man might have come to Adelaide to see his child, to see the woman he had loved. And it would explain the presence of her phone number in the book. But this theory, while compelling, couldn't be proven without DNA evidence. And that's where the real frustration of this case became apparent. The body had been embalmed in 1949, using techniques that damaged the DNA. For decades, attempts to extract usable DNA from the remains had failed. The technology existed to potentially identify the Somerton Man through genetic genealogy, the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer and identify countless Jane and John Does. But without good DNA samples, that technology was useless. Abbott and other researchers petitioned the South Australian government, for permission to exhume the body and attempt to extract DNA using the latest techniques. The request was denied multiple times over the years. There were legal concerns, ethical considerations, and bureaucratic obstacles. The Somerton Man remained in his grave, his DNA locked away, his identity still a mystery. Then, finally, in 2021, after years of campaigning and legal battles, permission was granted. In May of 2022, more than 73 years after he was buried, the Somerton Man's body was exhumed. His remains were carefully removed from the grave and transported to a facility where DNA could be extracted using the most advanced forensic techniques available. And this time, it worked. They got usable DNA. Not a lot, and not perfect, but enough. Enough to run through genetic genealogy databases. Enough to build a family tree. Enough, potentially, to finally give the Somerton Man his name back. Derek Abbott worked with a genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick, an expert in using DNA and family trees to identify unknown persons. They took the DNA profile from the Somerton Man and compared it to profiles in genealogical databases. They found matches, distant relatives, who shared common ancestors with the unknown man. From there, they began building a family tree backward through time, following the branches, tracking down records, making connections, and slowly, painstakingly, a name emerged. Carl Charles Webb, known as Charles Webb. Born in November of 1905 in Melbourne, Victoria, an electrical engineer and instrument maker. Married briefly in the 1920s, but separated from his wife with no children. A man who had moved around Australia, working in different cities, living a quiet life that left few traces in the historical record. In July of 2022, Derek Abbott and Colleen Fitzpatrick announced their findings. They believed, based on the DNA evidence and genealogical research, that the Somerton Man was Charles Webb. After more than 70 years, he finally had a name. But even with a name, so many questions remained unanswered. If he was Charles Webb, why was he in Adelaide? He had no known connections to the city. Why did he remove the labels from his clothing? Why did he have Joe Thompson's phone number? What was the code in the Rubaiyat? How did he die? Was it suicide, murder, or some tragic accident? Some researchers disputed the identification, arguing that the DNA evidence wasn't conclusive enough, that the family tree had gaps and uncertainties. They pointed out that without a direct descendant to compare the DNA to, the identification was based on matching to distant relatives, which could potentially produce false positives. Others accepted the identification, but noted that knowing his name didn't really solve the mystery. It just replaced one set of questions with another. Instead of asking, "Who is the Somerton Man?" we now ask, why did Charles Webb die on Somerton Beach with a code in his pocket and someone else's cigarettes in his pack? Research into Charles Webb's life revealed a man who seemed to vanish from official records in the mid-1940s. He had lived in Melbourne, worked as an engineer, had some involvement in the local technical community, but then the trail went cold. Where had he been in the years leading up to his death? What had he been doing? Who had he been seeing? Some investigators found a Charles Webb who had worked on electrical projects related to the war effort. Could this have been the same man? Had he been involved in classified work that later put him in danger? The espionage theory was revived with this new information. Perhaps he had been recruited for intelligence work during the war and had continued in that capacity afterward. Perhaps he had been silenced because of what he knew. But there was still no evidence to support this beyond speculation. No documents linking Charles Webb to intelligence work. No records of classified projects. Just gaps in the historical record that could mean anything or nothing. The woman, Joe Thompson, had died in 2007, taking her secrets to the grave. Her son Robin had died in 2009. Whatever they knew about the Somerton Man, whatever connection they might have had to him, died with them. There was no one left to ask. No one who could confirm or deny whether Charles Webb had been part of their lives. The code remained unbroken. Cryptographers continued to work on it, feeding it into computers, trying every algorithm, every method, Some believed it might not be a code at all, but rather initials, perhaps the first letters of lines from a poem or song that meant something to Webb and someone else. Others thought it might be a shorthand notation system that Webb had invented for his own use, meaningless to anyone else. One intriguing theory suggested that the letters might be the first letters of a message in another language entirely. If you assumed the message was in a language other than English and tried to construct sentences where each word began with these letters, you could potentially create meaningful phrases. But which language? And without knowing what system Webb had used, this was just guesswork. The strange circumstances of his death also remained unexplained. If Webb had been poisoned, who poisoned him and why? If he had poisoned himself, why do it on a beach in Adelaide? The autopsy had suggested poisoning, but couldn't identify the poison. Modern toxicology might have been able to identify substances that 1940s science couldn't detect. But by the time the body was exhumed in 2022, any traces of poison would have long since degraded beyond detection. Some medical experts who reviewed the autopsy report suggested that the symptoms could have been consistent with poisoning from a rare plant or chemical that wouldn't have been tested for routinely. Others suggested it could have been a reaction to some medication or combination of medications. Still, others thought it might have been a natural death, perhaps from an undiagnosed heart condition or aneurysm, and that the unusual findings in the autopsy were simply red herrings. Unusual, but ultimately unrelated to the cause of death. The unused train ticket suggested he had been planning to go somewhere. The bus ticket showed he had traveled within Adelaide. The American-made comb suggested he had either been to America or had connections to someone who had. Every object in his pockets told a fragment of a story, but without context, those fragments couldn't be assembled into a coherent narrative. And what about the cigarettes? Why Kenseth has cigarettes in an army club pack? Some researchers thought this might have been a signal, a way of identifying himself to a contact. In the world of espionage, such signals were common. A certain newspaper under the arm, a particular flower in the lapel, the wrong cigarettes in the wrong pack. But if it was a signal, who was it for? And if he was there to meet someone, did that person show up? Did something go wrong? The location of his death was also significant. Somerton Beach was quiet, somewhat isolated, a place where someone could sit for hours without being disturbed. If Webb had been meeting someone, it would have been a good location for a discreet encounter. If he had been planning to end his own life, it would have been a peaceful place to do it. Or if someone had wanted to kill him and make it look like a natural death or suicide, it would have been an ideal spot where a body might not be discovered for hours, giving the killer time to escape. The position of his body, with one arm raised and legs crossed, suggested he might have died while sitting upright and then slumped over. The arm might have been resting on the seawall, raised up as if he had been shading his eyes or resting his head on his hand. As rigor mortis set in, the arm stayed in that position, even as the body toppled over. Or could the position have been staged? Could someone have arranged the body to look a certain way? The police at the time didn't think so. There were no signs of the body having been moved or positioned. The sand around him was undisturbed except for his own weight. If he had been killed elsewhere and brought to the beach, there would have been signs, drag marks, disturbed sand, something. But there was nothing. Everything pointed to Webb having come to Somerton Beach under his own power, sat down against the seawall, and died there. Whether he died by his own hand, by someone else's hand, or by accident or natural causes, that remained the unanswerable question. In the years since the identification of the Somerton Man as Charles Webb, researchers have continued to dig into his life, looking for clues that might explain his death. They've found photographs of a man believed to be Webb, showing a serious-faced individual with the same general features as the Somerton Man. They've found records of his work, showing he was skilled with electronics and instruments, a precise and methodical man. But they haven't found the smoking gun, the one piece of evidence that would tie everything together and make sense of this bewildering case. They haven't found a suicide note. They haven't found evidence of threats against him. They haven't found a connection to Joe Thompson beyond the phone number in the book. They haven't found proof of espionage or criminal activity. They haven't decoded the mysterious letters. And so, the mystery of the Somerton Man persists, even now that we think we know his name. Charles Webb remains almost as enigmatic in death as the unknown man on the beach had been. His life, in the years before his death, is still largely a blank. His reasons for being in Adelaide are still unknown. His connection to the code, and the book, and the woman are still unexplained. Some cases resist solution not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because time has erased it, scattered it, buried it too deeply to ever recover. The Somerton Man case may be one of these. We may never know why Charles Webb died on that beach in 1948. We may never decode the letters on the back of the Rubaiyat. We may never understand what connection, if any, he had to Jo Thompson and her son. What we're left with is a story that seems more fiction than fact. A tale of mysterious codes and hidden identities, of romance and espionage, of secrets taken to the grave. It's a case that has everything: mystery, intrigue, possible international conspiracy, a forbidden love affair, an unbreakable code, and an unidentified body that stayed unidentified for over 70 years. And perhaps that's why it continues to fascinate people around the world. In an age where it seems like everything can be found, every person can be identified, every mystery can be solved, with enough computing power and DNA analysis, the Somerton Man reminds us that some secrets are stubborn. Some mysteries resist even our best efforts to solve them. The case has inspired novels and films and countless articles. It's been called Australia's greatest mystery, a real-life spy thriller, an impossible case. People have devoted years of their lives to trying to crack the code or identify the body. Amateur detectives have formed online communities to share theories and research. The case has become part of Australian folklore, a story passed down and embellished over generations. And now, with the identification of Charles Webb, the case enters a new phase. Instead of trying to discover who the Somerton Man was, researchers are trying to discover what happened to Charles Webb in the last days and hours of his life. They're looking for people who knew him, for records of his movements, for any shred of evidence that might explain how a Melbourne engineer ended up dead on an Adelaide beach with a code in his pocket. But time is working against them. Anyone who might have known Webb personally is almost certainly dead now. Records from that era are incomplete or destroyed. Memories have faded. The trail is nearly 80 years cold. Each year that passes makes it less likely that we'll ever fully understand what happened on Somerton Beach that day in 1948. Yet people keep trying. New researchers take up the case. New theories emerge. New technologies offer new possibilities for analysis. The code gets run through new algorithms. Photographs get enhanced with new software. The story gets re-examined from new angles, because that's what cold cases do. They haunt us. They challenge us. They refuse to let go. The Somerton Man, whether we call him that or call him Charles Webb, represents every unsolved mystery, every question without an answer, every person who vanished without explanation. His story resonates because it reminds us that the world is still full of unknowns, that not everything can be explained, that some people carry secrets so deep that even death doesn't reveal them. And so the investigation continues, not by police anymore, but by passionate individuals who believe that every mystery deserves to be solved, that every unidentified person deserves to have their name known, that every code deserves to be cracked. They work on the case in their spare time, piecing together fragments, following leads that go nowhere, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'll be the one to finally solve it. The Somerton Man's grave in West Terrace Cemetery has become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in the case. They leave flowers and coins and notes. They stand at the gravestone and wonder what secrets lie beneath. Now that the body has been exhumed and is in storage for ongoing research, there's talk of what should be done with the remains eventually. Should he be reburied? Should his remains be kept for future research as technology continues to advance? Should there be a memorial acknowledging both the unknown man he was for so long and Charles Webb, the man he may have been? These are questions without easy answers. much like everything else about this case. But what we can say with certainty is that the story of the Somerton Man, this man who was found dead on a beach 77 years ago, continues to captivate and mystify people around the world. His case has become legendary, a cautionary tale about how even in death, even with modern science, even with DNA and computers and international databases, some people remain stubbornly unknowable. If you've made it this far in this story, you're part of a long tradition of people who have been drawn into the mystery of the Somerton Man. You've followed the same clues that have frustrated investigators for decades. You've wondered, the same questions that have kept researchers awake at night. You've tried to make sense of a puzzle that may have no solution, or at least no solution that we can reach from here, separated by time and circumstance from the truth of what really happened. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved completely. Maybe the journey of investigation, the process of piecing together fragments of evidence, the act of caring enough about an unknown person to spend years trying to give them back their identity, maybe that matters more than the final answer. Because in trying to solve the mystery of the Somerton Man, researchers have honored his memory, kept his story alive, ensured that he wasn't just forgotten as another anonymous death in 1948. Think about all the people who have touched this case over the decades. The couple who first noticed him on the beach, the police who investigated, who took his fingerprints and made plaster casts of his face, who searched desperately for his identity, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, trying to understand what had killed this mysterious man, the reporter who found the tiny scrap of paper in the hidden pocket, the man who found the book in his car and kept it all those months before realizing its significance, the cryptographers who tried to crack the code, the woman in Glenelg who may have known him, who took her secrets to her grave, the researchers in later decades who refused to let the case die, who used new technologies and new methods to try to find answers, the genealogist and professor who finally gave him a name. Each of these people played a role in the story of the Somerton Man. Each of them added a piece to the puzzle, even if that piece didn't quite fit with all the others, even if it raised more questions than it answered. Together, they created a tapestry of investigation that spans more than 7 decades, a testament to human curiosity and our deep need to solve mysteries, to understand what happened, to find meaning in the inexplicable. The case also raises profound questions about identity and anonymity. In our modern world, it seems almost impossible to vanish completely. We leave digital footprints everywhere we go. Our faces are captured on security cameras dozens of times a day. Our DNA can be extracted from the tiniest biological sample and compared to databases containing millions of profiles. Our movements are tracked by our phones, our purchases by our credit cards, our communications by our emails and messages. But Charles Webb, if that's truly who he was, managed to die essentially anonymous in 1948. And it took 74 years and the most advanced forensic genealogy techniques to tentatively identify him. Even now, with a name attached to the body, we know remarkably little about him. His life remains largely a mystery. The crucial details, the ones that would explain why he died where and how he did, remain hidden. It makes you wonder how many other people have vanished into anonymity, their stories lost, their identities forgotten. How many other John and Jane Does are buried in unmarked graves around the world, their names known to no one, their families never learning what became of them? The Somerton Man was unusual in how much attention his case received, how many people cared enough to investigate, how his story captured public imagination. But there are countless others who disappeared without anyone noticing, whose mysteries will never be solved because no one is looking for answers. This case also highlights the limitations of forensic science, even modern forensic science. We have tools now that the investigators in 1948 couldn't have dreamed of. We can extract DNA from the tiniest samples. We can enhance photographs to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. We can run chemical analyses that detect substances measured in parts per billion. We can search databases containing billions of records in seconds. And yet, even with all these tools, we still can't definitively say what happened to Charles Webb. We can't decode his message. We can't explain all the strange circumstances surrounding his death. We can't even be 100% certain that the DNA analysis correctly identified him, though it seems highly probable. Science can take us a long way toward truth, but it can't take us all the way there. Not when time and decay have eroded the evidence, not when crucial witnesses are dead, not when records were never created or have been destroyed. There's a limit to what can be reconstructed from fragments, and the Somerton Man case seems to exist right at that limit, tantalizingly close to being solved, but still just out of reach. Let's think about the code again for a moment, because it really is the most intriguing element of this whole case. 5 lines of letters, carefully written on the back of a book of Persian poetry, hidden or at least not immediately noticed by the person who found the book. What could it mean? If it's a code, it's remarkably resistant to analysis. Professional cryptographers, intelligence agencies, academics, and amateur code breakers have all taken their shot at it over the years. They've tried every known cipher system. They've looked for patterns, for repeated sequences, for mathematical relationships between the letters. They've tried to find meaning by reading it backward, by looking at every second letter, by rearranging the lines. Nothing has worked. Some experts have concluded it probably isn't a traditional code at all. Instead, it might be some kind of personal notation system, something that made sense to the person who wrote it but wouldn't be comprehensible to anyone else. Think of it like personal shorthand. Maybe Webb, if he wrote it, had developed his own system for keeping notes, perhaps related to his work as an engineer. The letters could represent technical specifications, measurements, formulas, or concepts that would only make sense if you understood his personal notation system, or maybe their initials. Perhaps each letter represents the first letter of a word in a sentence or phrase that was meaningful to Webb. It could be a love letter, with each line being the first letters of a romantic message. It could be a reminder, a list, a poem, a prayer. Without knowing what words the letters stand for, we can't reconstruct the original message. There's also the possibility that the letters are meaningless, either random scribbles or deliberate misdirection. If Webb was involved in something secretive or dangerous, the code could have been intentionally designed to be unbreakable, a red herring to throw investigators off the real trail. Create something that looks like a code, let people waste time trying to crack it, while the real secret remains hidden somewhere else entirely. Or perhaps it wasn't Webb who wrote the letters at all. The book had supposedly been in someone else's car. Maybe a previous owner of the book had written the letters, and they had nothing to do with Webb's death. Maybe Webb found the book with the letters already in it and kept it for some reason, perhaps because the rubaiyat meant something to him personally, or perhaps because he was planning to give it to someone. But that doesn't explain why Webb would have torn out the final page and kept it in his pocket. That action seems deliberate and meaningful. He wanted those specific words, Tamám Shud, finished, ended, the play is done. Was it a suicide note? A philosophical statement? A message to someone? The rubaiyat itself is full of themes about mortality, the brevity of life, the importance of living in the present moment, because death comes for everyone eventually. The verses speak of wine and roses, of seizing pleasure while you can, of the futility of worrying about the afterlife. They're fatalistic, melancholy, but also strangely joyful in their acceptance of life's transience. For someone contemplating death, the rubaiyat would be an appropriate companion. The final words, Tamám Shud, would be a fitting epitaph. It's finished. The play is done. Time to exit the stage. But if Webb was planning suicide, why do it in Adelaide? Why not in Melbourne, where he had lived and worked? Why travel to a city where he apparently had no connections, at least none that investigators could find? Unless, of course, he did have a connection. Perhaps to the woman in Glenelg, perhaps to something or someone else that has never been discovered. The theory that Webb might have been the father of Joe Thompson's son Robin is compelling because it would provide a motive for him to be in Adelaide. Perhaps he had learned about the child, perhaps wanted to see him or to be part of his life. Perhaps he had come to Adelaide to confront Joe, to ask why she had kept the child's existence from him, to plead with her to acknowledge him as the father, and perhaps she had refused. Perhaps she had told him to go away, that she was married, that there was no place for him in her life or her son's life. Perhaps that rejection had been the final straw, pushing Webb to suicide on the beach near her home, leaving behind the book as a message. Look what you've driven me to. It's finished. Tamám Shud. But this is speculation, a narrative constructed from fragments that may or may not fit together. We don't know if Webb was Robin's father. We don't know if he even knew Joe Thompson. We don't know if his death was suicide, murder, accident, or natural causes. We're building castles in the air, creating stories that feel true because they're emotionally satisfying, because they give meaning to seemingly random events. The human mind craves narrative. We want stories with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. We want causes and effects, motives and consequences. When we encounter a mystery like the Somerton Man, we instinctively try to create a narrative that makes sense, that explains all the strange details, that gives purpose to the seemingly meaningless. But reality doesn't always cooperate with our need for narrative. Sometimes things happen for no good reason. Sometimes people die, and we never learn why. Sometimes codes can't be cracked, identities can't be confirmed, mysteries can't be solved. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. And yet, we keep trying. Because giving up feels like a betrayal, like abandoning Charles Webb to eternal anonymity and confusion. As long as there's a chance, however slim, of finding answers, people will continue investigating this case. They'll continue searching archives for records of Webb's life. They'll continue analyzing the code, hoping that some new insight or technology will finally crack it. They'll continue looking for connections between Webb and Joe Thompson, hoping to find proof of a relationship that would explain so much. The exhumation of the body in 2022 opened new possibilities. With Webb's remains available for analysis, researchers can use techniques that didn't exist even a few years ago. They can extract better DNA samples. They can do isotope analysis to determine where Webb lived during different periods of his life, what he ate, where he traveled. They can use facial reconstruction techniques to create more accurate images of what he looked like in life. They can do additional toxicology testing, though after 74 years it's unlikely any traces of poison would remain detectable. Each of these avenues might provide new information, new clues, new pieces of the puzzle, or they might reveal nothing new at all. Sometimes, even our best technology and most advanced methods run up against the fundamental problem that time erases evidence, that decay is relentless, that the past is ultimately unknowable in its full detail. But the attempt matters. The investigation itself is valuable, even if it doesn't lead to definitive answers. Because every bit of information we gather about Charles Webb restores a piece of his humanity. Every detail we learn about his life reminds us that he wasn't just a mystery, wasn't just a puzzle to be solved. He was a person. He lived. He worked. He loved. Perhaps. He suffered, perhaps. He made choices that led him to Somerton Beach on that November night in 1948. And whatever those choices were, whatever circumstances brought him there, he deserves to be remembered as more than just the unknown man, the Somerton Man, the body on the beach. Giving him back his name, Charles Webb, is an act of respect, of dignity, of acknowledgement that he mattered, that his life and death mean something beyond their value as an intriguing puzzle. Even if we never learn why he died, even if we never crack the code, even if we never fully understand his story, we've at least given him this. We've remembered him. We've refused to let him be forgotten. In a way, that might be the real solution to the case. Not answering every question, not explaining every mystery, but simply refusing to let Charles Webb disappear into complete anonymity. By investigating his death, by caring enough to spend decades trying to identify him, by keeping his story alive through all these years, we've given meaning to his life, even if we don't fully understand it. There's something profound in that. In our modern age of constant distraction, of endless information, of new mysteries appearing every day, The fact that people still care about what happened on Somerton Beach in 1948 says something important about human nature. We care about justice. We care about truth. We care about giving the dead their dignity. We care about solving mysteries not just because they're intellectually interesting, but because every unsolved mystery represents a failure to fully honor the person at its center. Charles Webb, the Somerton Man, has been honored by decades of investigation, by generations of people who cared enough to search for answers. He's been honored by the scientists who developed the techniques that finally identified him. He's been honored by everyone who has read his story and wondered what really happened, who has spared a thought for this mysterious man and his strange death. And in being honored, remembered, and investigated, perhaps Charles Webb has received something more valuable than answers. He's received proof that even in death, even 77 years after dying alone on a beach, even after lying in an unmarked grave for decades, people still care. Strangers care. Researchers care. You, listening to this story right now, you care. You've stayed with this narrative for thousands of words, following the twists and turns of an investigation that has no satisfying conclusion, no dramatic revelation, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense. You've stayed because the story matters. Because Charles Webb matters. Because mysteries like this remind us that the world is deeper and stranger than we sometimes realize, that there are still unknowns out there, still questions without answers, still secrets hiding in plain sight. The Somerton Man case teaches us humility. It reminds us that for all our technology, for all our scientific advancement, for all our databases and DNA analysis and facial recognition and artificial intelligence, we still can't always penetrate the past. We still can't always know what happened or why. We're still, in some fundamental way, limited creatures groping toward truth in a universe that doesn't give up its secrets easily. But it also teaches us persistence. It shows us that some people will dedicate years, even decades, to solving a mystery that offers no reward beyond knowledge itself. Derek Abbott spent years investigating this case, not because he was paid to, not because it advanced his career, but because he couldn't let it go, because it mattered to him, because he believed that Charles Webb deserved to have his name back. And now he does. After 74 years, the Somerton Man has a name. It's not a perfect solution. There are still doubts, still questions, still uncertainties. But it's something. It's progress. It's a victory, however partial, of persistence over time, of human determination over the forces of decay and forgetting. The code may never be cracked. The exact cause of death may never be determined. The relationship between Webb and Joe Thompson may never be proven. The reason Webb came to Adelaide may never be discovered. But we've taken one enormous mystery, who was the Somerton Man, and reduced it to several smaller mysteries about Charles Webb's life and death. That's something. That's progress. And the investigation continues. Even now, researchers are digging through archives, searching for records of Charles Webb's life. They're trying to find photographs, letters, documents, anything that might shed light on who he was and what brought him to Somerton Beach. They're trying to track his movements in the months and years before his death. They're trying to find people who might have known him, though at this point, that seems almost impossible. They're also continuing to work on the code. New people encounter it fresh, without the baggage of decades of failed attempts. They bring new perspectives, new ideas, new methods. Perhaps one of them will see something that everyone else has missed. Perhaps the code will suddenly make sense to someone with the right background or the right insight. Or perhaps it won't. Perhaps the code will remain forever mysterious, a tantalizing puzzle that can't be solved because we lack some crucial piece of information that Webb took to his grave. Perhaps it was never meant to be decoded by strangers, was only meaningful to Webb himself or to one other person who might have understood its significance. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Maybe the value isn't in the solution, but in the search, in the human impulse to investigate and question, and never quite give up hope that answers might be found. The Somerton Man story has become part of the cultural fabric now, woven into the collective consciousness of anyone interested in cold cases and unsolved mysteries. It's become a benchmark, the case against which other mysterious deaths are measured. People say things like, "It's almost as strange as the Somerton Man case," or "It reminds me of the Tamám Shud mystery." The case has transcended its specifics to become a symbol of the unknowable, the unsolvable, the eternally mysterious. And in that transcendence, Charles Webb has achieved a kind of immortality. He's more famous in death than he probably ever was in life. His name, or at least the name Somerton Man, is known around the world. His story has been told and retold countless times. He's appeared in books, documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos, articles, academic papers. He's been the subject of endless speculation and debate. For a man who apparently wanted to die anonymously, who removed all identifying labels from his clothing, who carried no wallet or identification, this fame might be ironic. Or perhaps it would have pleased him. We'll never know. We can't know what Charles Webb wanted or expected when he made his way to Somerton Beach that night in November 1948. All we can know is what happened after. We can know that his death sparked one of the longest-running investigations in Australian history. We can know that people cared enough about identifying him to spend decades working on the problem. We can know that even now, even with a tentative identification, the investigation continues, driven by people who believe every question deserves an answer, every mystery deserves to be solved. So where does that leave us at the end of this long story? We've followed the investigation from that morning on Somerton Beach through 77 years of false leads, dead ends, breakthroughs, and frustrations. We've learned about the mysterious code, the removed labels, the woman in Glenelg, the possible poisoning, the decades of anonymity, and finally the tentative identification through DNA and genealogy. We know more now than we did at the beginning, but we still don't know enough. We still can't say with certainty what happened, why it happened, or even exactly who it happened to. The identification of Charles Webb is the best answer we have, but it's not a definitive answer. It's a probable answer, a likely answer, an answer that fits the evidence as well as any answer could after so much time has passed. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Somerton Man case. Maybe it teaches us that in the real world, outside of detective novels and crime shows, answers aren't always neat and tidy. Cases don't always wrap up with every question answered and every loose end tied. Sometimes we have to settle for probable instead of certain, for likely instead of proven, for best guess instead of definitive truth. But settling for that doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean the investigation was a failure. It means we've pushed the boundaries of what's knowable as far as they can be pushed, given the evidence available. It means we've honored Charles Webb by refusing to forget him, by working tirelessly to give him back his identity, by caring enough about his story to investigate it for more than 7 decades. That's not nothing. That's actually something quite remarkable. In a world where new tragedies and mysteries occur every day, where it would be easy to forget about one man who died alone on a beach in 1948, we've remembered, we've investigated, we've cared, and we've partially succeeded in solving a mystery that seemed unsolvable. So if you've made it all the way to the end of this story, I want to thank you for caring too. Thank you for spending this time learning about Charles Webb, the Somerton Man, and the decades-long effort to identify him and understand his death. Thank you for being part of the community of people who believe that every person deserves to be remembered, that every mystery deserves investigation, that every cold case deserves another look. And if this case has captured your imagination the way it has captured the imagination of so many people over the years, consider this an invitation. The investigation isn't over. There are still questions to answer, still avenues to explore, still mysteries to solve. Maybe you'll be the one who finally cracks the code. Maybe you'll be the one who finds the crucial piece of evidence that explains everything. Maybe you'll be the one who finally solves the mystery of the Somerton Man. Or maybe, like all of us who have worked on this case before you, you'll add one more piece to the puzzle, one more fragment of understanding, One more small step toward truth. And that's enough. That's valuable. That's worth doing. Because in the end, the Somerton Man case isn't just about solving a mystery. It's about remembering a person. It's about refusing to let someone be forgotten just because they died in unusual circumstances. It's about the fundamental human belief that every life matters, every death deserves investigation, and every person deserves dignity, even in death, even decades after death, even when their identity was unknown for 74 years. Charles Webb matters. The Somerton Man matters. This case matters. And your interest in it, your willingness to learn about it and think about it and care about it, that matters too. So, don't forget this story. Don't forget Charles Webb. Don't forget that on December 1st, 1948, a man died on Somerton Beach under mysterious circumstances that have never been fully explained. Don't forget that it took 74 years to tentatively identify him. Don't forget that there are still questions without answers, still mysteries within mysteries, still secrets that may never be revealed. Remember it. Share it. Keep the story alive. Because as long as people remember the Somerton Man, as long as people care enough to investigate and question and search for answers, Charles Webb is not forgotten. His death is not meaningless. His mystery is not abandoned. And that, perhaps, is the closest thing to justice that we can offer him now, 77 years after his death. We can't bring him back. We can't change what happened to him. We can't answer every question about his life and death. But we can remember him. We can honor him. We can refuse to let his story end with Tamám Shud, with "it is finished." Because it's not finished. The investigation continues. The search for answers continues. The story of the Somerton Man, of Charles Webb, continues. And it will continue as long as there are people who care about cold cases, who believe in justice, who think that every mystery deserves someone willing to work toward solving it. So thank you for being part of that continuation. Thank you for caring about Charles Webb. Thank you for listening to his story. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries, please hit that like button, subscribe to Untold Case, and ring the bell so you never miss another story. Because there are so many more cases out there, so many more mysteries waiting to be explored, so many more stories of people who deserve to be remembered. This has been the story of the Somerton Man, of Charles Webb, of a mystery that has endured for more than 7 decades and may endure for decades more. It's a story without a perfect ending, but it's a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth investigating. And now that you know it, you're part of it too. You're part of the long line of people who have cared about this case, who have wondered about what really happened, who have refused to let Charles Webb be forgotten. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most fascinating cold cases. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and never stop searching for the truth. This is Untold Case, signing off.